Recording this computer. Cool. Welcome everyone. Really good to see you all here today. I'm glad to be joined by Christian, who is the founder of UX Plus. And today he's going to be walking us through basically the fundamentals or a 101 of UX for no coders. And I guess it will apply elsewhere on any UX thing that you're working on. So the format for today is going to be pretty simple. I think Christian is going to walk through a mini workshop for us, and then at the end, he's going to open up for some questions. So I hope that sounds good to you guys. And if you've got any questions along the way, just pop them in the chat. And I'm sure Christian is happy to field them as he goes. So on that note, I will pass it over to you, Christian, and yeah, it'd be great to hear an introduction and take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. So thanks everyone for having me over here. So I might not be able to actually access the chat, but I'll see. I'll see if I can. Oh, there you go. So I'm showing the wrong screen. So let me fix that. Share screen. Let's desktop one. There you go. And then keynote. So switch. There you go. Oh no, wrong. Always happens.
No worries.
Let's see. How do I switch? There you go. You see my screen, right?
Yeah, I can see UX crash course. Yes.
Awesome. Perfect.
Awesome.
So thanks everyone for having me. Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to share what I can to the no code community. I love the no code community. So I was part of on deck no code. That's where I met Max and some of the people in the call as well. I also started a no code community in the Philippines. We have 1,200 members. It's just a Facebook group of people sharing links, but it's still good. We just started a couple of months ago as well. So always happy to contribute to the bigger no code space. Yeah, let's get started. So thanks for being here again. Yeah, if you've been practicing UX in some way, if you've been building products, you probably know all of this or some of it, but a refresher is always good. So what I'll be covering today is generally these topics of a little bit of introduction on myself, an introduction to UX, what's your UX mindset, and somehow like how that links into the UX process. I think I might be able to jump quickly to the most common UX mistakes in the middle. But if you want to get a recording of this 5 hour version of this workshop where it covers the full thing, please do use the link on the right. So I'll paste it in chat right now, just in case. There you go. So you can use the link on the right and watch the whole thing. There's also a live usability testing in there in that workshop. So yeah, might be good to watch in piece in different parts. So it's a long workshop, but yeah. So our goal for today is for everyone to be equipped with the knowledge and skills to start their journey as UX designers, even if you're a no coder. So how I think of UX design is actually just problem solving. You're using the principles of user experience to solve a problem, to design a solution around a problem area. So that's typically what no coders use. That's what we do when we build our products. It's typically not just for us, but also for maybe a smaller set of people or like a larger set of buyers or customers. So we're solving problems for them. That's why they're buying into it. And when we're solving problems, it's not just that we build something and launch it and hope it works. That those are assumptions. We might have good assumptions based on our individual experiences, but what we want to do is be more deliberate and thoughtful in our solutions, and um, hopefully I can present to you guys a better way of solving problems moving forward, or like you take some lessons from this workshop and apply it to your current workflow. So this workshop is generally made for no coders that want to make the jump and maximize the value of user experience in their process, and also like any interested professional that want to know what UX is, how can it be applied in their own businesses. So like, who am I to speak about all of this? Yeah, again, I'm Christian Panase. I'm a designer for 14 years. Right now, I have UX Plus, which started as a conference, but now it's a UX learning platform. So basically UX Plus University, which I think I have a slide there later on. But UX Plus University, yeah, you can get into a career in UX by paying nothing upfront, and we don't charge you tuition fee. But once you get into a UX career, like say you're a UX designer, you get a small percentage of your salary for a fixed amount of time for 2 years. So previously, I was head of design in a startup, a fintech startup, and then before that, I was in the agency space. Again, like UX Plus, this started as a conference. It's the largest UX conference in our side of the world. So I'm in Asia actually. It's I think it's 12 a.m. here right now. So it might be if you're on the other side of the world, as I believe everyone is, it might be 12 p.m. or like 9 p.m. somehow. So we held this in 2019 in person and then in 2020 online, and we had a lot of attendees, a good amount of attendees during that time. And now I'm, yeah, I launched UX Plus University, which is basically what I mentioned earlier, a cohort-based course to teach everyone how to design, how to think more deliberately, how to talk to users, and be UX designers. So before that, again, like I was in a fintech startup, we did a bunch of dashboards and screens. It's a small business loan company. 4 years ago, I co-founded a UX agency that helped build booking platforms for airlines or smart home devices. That the app that allows you to control your your smart home devices. Right there, and then also designed a couple of other websites. 9 years ago, I started in this started servicing clients 9 years ago, even though I started 14 years ago as a graphic designer. Designing websites and brands and logos for Kobe Bryant, for Dwayne Wade, for Usher, which is super interesting. Usher wanted essentially a wardrobe that only Usher can log into. He picks from clothes that he already owns. He puts that in a cart that gets sent to his stylist, and that stylist sends whichever clothes he picked to wherever Usher is around the world, whether you're shooting a movie, shooting a video, music video, or recording an album. So it's definitely an Usher problem that I was solving with this platform. So only he can log into this. We also designed websites for Usain Bolt, and yeah, that's pretty much my background. So intro to UX. What is UX? What is UX design? And what are the UX activities? So some say UX is the step-by-step process of a user in a product. So that might be the customer journey, or some say it's how people think and feel about the product, their reaction to your product or service or app or website. Some say it's the structure of the product. So it might be the layout or the wireframe. Some say it's the content and layout screen. Say it might be the copy, how it speaks to the user, and some say it's how useful and functional a product is. So if it's easy to use or it's delightful to use, that's user experience. Really, like user experience is all of those. It encompasses all aspects of a person's interaction with a company, its products, and its services over time. So when you interact with a product, a company, a service, the reaction, the feelings you have, the thoughts you have from that interaction, that's part of your user experience. So that's what you're trying to improve. So if you're part of the company or part of the startup that's launching the product or service, you want to improve that experience that's happening. So that experience doesn't just lie on the interaction on the screen, but also, say for example, they encounter your brand in an ad, or they call customer service, or they chat in your messenger bot or elsewhere. So they message you. That's an interaction. So all of those interactions are interconnected and they associate it with the brand, product, company, and that's a user experience. So anytime a person comes into contact with your company, the result of it again is user experience. And when you're thinking about user experience, you have to ask yourself, how might you or how might we make this experience the best it can be? So that's done by UX design. So that's the process of improving the user experience. So it's a process of increasing a user satisfaction, or like allowing them to get what they want by improving usefulness, accessibility, pleasure, and everything else. So I just put there three things that you could improve, or you could focus on, but there's also delight. So pleasure is kind of delight, but there's also more than just these three things. But for now, let's just focus on its use, its accessibility, and the pleasure, or the feelings that users get from your product. So a great solution that's done through UX design considers three things. So when you're trying to solve a problem, you're looking at things in three different lenses and then combine those. So you're solving it for the user, the people, you're solving it for the business, and then you're also considering the technology or the resources. So the people lies on the top, which is it desirable? Are we solving the right problems for our users? And then the technology, is it feasible? Are we using our strengths? Can it be done? Do we have enough resources, people, money, or anything to get this solution out the door? And then is it viable? Does it contribute to the long-term growth of our company? Does it make our business sustainable, or um, live longer, essentially? So a great way to think about all of these is something might be desirable and feasible, but not viable. So an example would be a bank giving away money to people. They definitely can do it. It's definitely feasible. The users would definitely love it. Like I would love free money from a bank, but it will kill the company. It's not viable, right? So when you're looking at solutions, you look if you can do you look at if you can do it. Do the users even want it? And does it help the company? Does it sustain the company? But as a UX practitioner, you always have to put users first. So that's the first lens, or even the last lens that uh, you filter your solution through, because it might be great that you charge your company, you charge X amount for your product, right? Like it might you might just need 10 users paying $1,000 to have 100K ARR, right? Like a good sustainable 100K per year business, 100K USD per year business. But if your customers can't afford it, it's not really a great solution. You can definitely do it. You can start charging right away. Like there's no code tools, there's Stripe, there's Gumroad, and then it's going to be a great business. But then your users aren't can't afford it, for example. So you have to balance all these three things and put the users first, because it's not worth our time to think about feasibility and viability if no one wants it. So UX, again, like this was mentioned earlier, step-by-step process of a user in a product. When we measure those step-by-step process using certain UX exercises, so there's the user journey, user flows, or service blueprints. Essentially, you're trying to measure the interactions at each step of the user, and then what happens in the background, what happens in the foreground. So background might be, so say someone messages in the chat bot on the bottom right of the page, and then they answer certain questions and they want to reach out to a person. So it's not automated anymore. Something has to happen in the business. How do you keep track of what happens in a business and how you respond to each interaction of a website, sorry, of a user in a website? That's through a service blueprint or a user journey. And then, as you can see on the right, you're also measuring the feelings of the people or what they might be thinking. So for you to gather all of this, you have to do some research. You have to talk to the users. So this that leads us to this. Some say it's how you think and feel about the product. Well, how you try to gather what you put in those maps or in those blueprints are one-on-one conversations with people. So you use the feedback, you observe the people, you ask them the right questions that are neutral. So remember, you're more of an investigator or a reporter. You can't lead the witness essentially. So um, when you're interviewing a user, a great thing to keep in mind is you shouldn't ever say, "Will our product be the solution to your problem?" Because you're kind of saying asking a yes or no question, right? Like you want to understand in a user interview the real context, like what led them to buy a product in your website or buy whatever you're offering. Like what were their replacements for your product before, or what problems are they really solving? So it's up to you to create the solution, but it's not really up to them to give the solutions for you. If they volunteer the information, that's great, but you shouldn't directly ask them that what kind of solutions, or maybe that's a good question, but will our solution be the perfect fit for you? And if they say yes, you feel great, right? But it doesn't really matter unless they insert their credit card in your website, insert their credit card details in your website, and actually pay. So what they say and what they actually do are two different things. So you can get both through different UX research methods, which I'll go through later. So some say it's UX is the structure of a product. This might be where people associate user experience. Usually, it's part of it, but UX is a bigger discipline than just the wireframes and the sitemaps. So, but then there's a key important part of it. So, building out the low fidelity. So, the low fidelity, when I say low fidelity, think of the word fidelity as believability. So, if you design something like this on the right, middle right side, like the wireframes, right? It's low fidelity because if you put it in front of a user, they wouldn't believe really that that's an actual product, right? So, you want to do low fidelity designs to involve more people in your design thinking process or as you design a solution because you might want to involve marketing, you might want to involve a copywriter or something like that, like different people in your organization or whoever you're working with, because that allows them to contribute very early to your process. So all of these wireframing, user flows, information architecture, affinity mapping, which is card sorting, grouping certain ideas together or solutions together or problems together. That's affinity mapping. All of these are low fidelity solutions where you involve more people because you want as much as ideas as you can, or you want to invalidate or validate your assumptions pretty early. So that's why you're co-building with everyone else. So this is an important part because you shouldn't go straight to high fidelity. So the problem with going straight to high fidelity design, which is a highly believable design, is if you design something like this right away, it you can't involve people in your organization at this level, um, and they really can't contribute to it as much as they can because it feels like it's finished, right? So you want to involve people at this stage where they feel that it's still rough. They can still form the idea with you. So the great designs are built with others. It's not just built alone, or at least the most effective designs. Of course, if you have experience building it alone, the best validation at the end is actual usage and actual feedback from users. But if you're working with many people, if you're working with a team, or if you're still forming your idea, there's no solution out there and you're looking at competitors, you're looking at the current solutions that people use that might not be digital. A low fidelity design process might be great for you because you're still figuring out what copy should I write there or what text should be placed or where should the logo go next. But once you figure that part out, that's when you move to the high fidelity part of the process, which is user interface design, the interaction design, like when you hover on something or when there's a notice that something is sold out and then it pops up. So like all of those interactions that happen on an actual app or website, that's high fidelity design. So this is an important part as well because this is what the users will believe. So they wouldn't believe this stage. They would believe that if they have something in their hands, even if it's just flat mock-ups that it's clickable and you use Figma to make it an actual prototype, but you didn't really code anything yet, um, you'll get more accurate feedback from a design like this versus testing a design that's in the low fidelity stage or testing a wireframe, for example. So lastly, what some say is the usefulness and functionality of a product. Well, you can test all of those through different tools. So you can use usability testing. You can use look back, for example. So look back, I believe it's lookback.io. It's really it's a user testing tool or UX testing tool where you go through the website with a user, you give them tasks, and then you observe their reactions. And if they're confused, you take note of that. If they're lost within your website, they take note of that, or your app, they take you take note of that. So essentially, you're trying to test the website even though it's not launched yet, or like even with the smaller set of users. Or when it's launched, you test it across maybe even 5 users. You only need to test maybe 5 users. So that's a rule of thumb generally. If you have to interview at least 5. If you can do 5, that's great. A little less than that, that's fine as well. Like what you need to do actually is just start talking to users. So all of these methods might be confusing, it might be difficult, you might have to read more articles about it, but really it's just a conversation with the user. Whether it's you're testing an existing product or just having a conversation and trying to get insight from them. Best way you can do and to improve your no code product right now, if even if you're still building it, and if it's in a believable state, which is high fidelity, is to get a couple of screens and just test it. Like put it in front of a user and see their reaction. Like ask them what do they think that that product is for. Um, um, Now that they know that it's a product, what would they do in a product just like that? So you're staying neutral. You're not really forcing them. Like uh, maybe you'd have more specific tasks after a few questions, but you want to get the raw feedback. So all of these replay analysis with full stories, or you're watching the heat maps of a product where people click, or A/B testing, like you're testing two different versions of a site, or looking at analytics. Analytics tells you the what, it doesn't really tell you the why, but it's still a great tool. So say for example, people drop off at this certain page in the onboarding flow, and it's shown in the analytics that nobody goes from this page to the next page, or not much, or like only 20% of users go from page A to page B. So it tells you what happens. It doesn't tell you why. So you'd have to use the rest of the methods above, which is usability testing, which is basically testing your website or app with the user, having a neutral conversation with them, not leading them on, trying to gather their raw feedback. So seems like a lot of steps. All of these are UX exercises. Each is part of the UX process, but you don't have to do everything. So that's what I want to impart to you. So it seems like a lot of steps just to get a great design out the door. But really, if you want to shortcut anything, the best two things you have to do is create a prototype, create a very quick mock-up that's somehow believable, has some doesn't have to be fully designed, but it's believable. It seems like it's a real product, and then put it in front of a user and try to gather feedback. So that's it. Like that's what all of these steps boil down to. And then in between each step, if you're say a much bigger team, or you're a team of five or a team of eight, then these methods would cut across the conversations that mostly deal with opinions, like your own opinions. So your own ideas, your own opinions, if it's not actually live or nobody purchases it yet, it's all a great hunch, or it's all a great guess, or it's all a great assumption. But all of those again are not real solutions yet, because at any stage when you're still designing something and nobody's still using it or nobody's providing feedback to it, those are just great assumptions. So it's not useful um, unless you get something out the door. So yeah, if you want to focus on just two things, get a prototype done, or like a very small version of the MVP. Or it might be just an onboarding flow in your sign up page, or it might just be like a home page and like a key inner page. So just test it out. Like just try to gather feedback. What's their feedback on the copy, the header that you just wrote? Do they understand the value of what you're trying to solve? Does it solve their problem? In just like a couple of seconds, you'll know right away. So and then also when you're testing a website or an app, they typically don't read the paragraph right below a big uh, a text that's set big, so the big header text essentially. They don't read the paragraph right below it if the header text is not compelling enough. So certain rules like that, or certain knowledge or insight like that, you'd only come across by just observing how people scroll, what do they skip in your app or your product or website. So yeah, best thing you can do, launch and test. So for these UX exercises, again, don't just take one part of the process and call it UX. So say for example, oh, I'm wireframing now. I'm a UX designer, so it's not bad, right? But like what I'm trying to do is make it easy for you guys. If you're gonna focus on one thing, it's really prototyping and testing. But with all of these exercises, again, you have to design the whole experience. You have to drive the cycle all the way through, whether it's just like three steps in those processes, and then also focus on the outcome, not the output. So what do I mean by outcome and output? An output is a website. An output might be your application itself. The outcome is the problem that was solved by that medium or that artifact that you created. So say for example, outcome versus output is if you want to buy a bike, you don't really want the bike. Some might want the bike, but you might not really want the bike itself, but you want the experience of riding it. So that's the outcome. The joy of riding, or you might be riding with other people, the community, or the camaraderie that happens when you bike or try biking. Really, you're not in a bike store just to get the bike. You want to ride that bike. So that's the outcome, or that's what you really want to get to. Or your outcome may be even further, like you want to be fit or you want to be healthy. So there are different outcomes and jobs to be done depending on the user. They don't typically want to go to your website. It's just that they're there because they want their problems to be solved. So the easier you design the experience, the more I guess the easier you make the experience for that user, the sooner they'll get to their outcome. So again, this might be all overwhelming. Before we dive in, let's talk about you, the designer, and through the UX mindset and the changing role of the designer. So I'll get to questions in a bit, but yeah, like we'll just go through this super quickly, and I just have a few more. So there's never been a more significant time to be a designer. A lot of founders are started as designers themselves. Um, in the past, the designer is the last to know. So if you think of yourself as a problem solver, you're a designer, and typically, if you've been in a corporate setting or in an agency, you're definitely you might have in the past years, you might have been the last to know about whatever needs to be done, and everything feels like it's super rushed, right? But today, or at least in the near future, the designer is central. So for you to solve problems, if you're building products, or you could even put no code there, you're central to the conversation, because you're not just the one executing the product, but you're also the one uncovering the problem or discussing it across different stakeholders and trying to connect the user to the internal stakeholders, or whatever the business needs, or like you're trying to connect the user to the technology. So you move from being tactical to being strategic, and being reactive to being proactive. So the old school graphic designer, or like the designer in the past, would be, oh, like give me the brief, I'll do it, I'll send it to you tomorrow. And then revisions, 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 revisions. Because you didn't get it right the first time, because you weren't involved in figuring out if it's the right problem to solve. Right. And then you didn't also co-design the solution with the people. So they don't feel invested in your design. That's why there's a ton of revisions afterwards. So if you're designing for a client, or you're creating a no-code app for someone, might be a lot of back and forth if you're reactive, or if you're tactical, you're focusing on just the deliverables and not the overall strategy, if your solution actually leads to an outcome. So since design is problem solving, you can say that everyone here, at least, is a designer. But the UX world is complicated. If you Google the UX process, you'll get all of these shapes and sizes. Why would you do it? Well, one good reason why is most problems aren't only skin deep. So you don't just, for example, design a donation form. You want that charity to actually get the money and get that interaction all the way through. So you have to test each interaction so that the charity drives more donations. So you don't just say, for example, design a sign up form and hope for the best. Have to test that, and or you might have to build an onboarding flow that handholds the first time customer. So it's not just about the output or the artifact, it's the design of the experience. Again, outcome over output. You have to widen your scope, since you're the one taking care of the whole experience for the user. So again, start with the end in mind. You go from input to output to outcome. So input is your insights, your research, actual data, qualitative and quantitative data. So qualitative is people's opinions, what they say, um, what they do in the usability tests, their opinions or customer feedback. And then quantitative data is what you see on analytics, on Google Analytics, for example, or anywhere you look at data. So it might be ConvertKit, or it might be elsewhere in your no-code app, like you're looking at visitors, bounce rates, things like that. Tells you the what, the qualitative data tells you the why. So you can get to an output, which is your website, but that's not the goal. The goal is not the website or the app. The goal is the outcome. Like, how has the life of the user changed after using your output? So you need to ask more questions. You need to be a facilitator, facilitating the problem solving process across the business, technology, and users. And you are objective. So you shouldn't just rely on your opinions and taste. So it gets you definitely all far further than anyone else if you just go with your opinions and taste, because you're essentially nothing's holding you back. But you can only get to a certain point by just using your own opinions and taste. There will come a time that you need to have actual user feedback, and allow that to shape your decisions moving forward. So now that you know this, you are the voice of the user. You understand their context, their intent, their needs, and their goals. But even though you're the voice of the user, you are not the user. So even though you started as a user of whichever problem or solution you're doing, you're not the voice. You're the voice, but you are not them. So you're the representative of them. So you have to be talking to users to represent the voice. You're not just representing your own voice. So we covered this a little bit earlier, but really in the traditional design process or problem solving process, typically top to bottom, from scope to timeline, deliverables, fixed budget, design revision. This is what you would typically call waterfall, because it all falls down on you. It's one after the other. So this is the traditional process. So in this traditional process, you'd see things like the hovering art director, the design factory assembly line. So it's kind of like a hovering art director, but you pass one asset to another. Or you typically see the pixel pusher, like someone again hovering somewhere in your vicinity or in your Slack, and then if you could just move that last one pixel to the left, that will save the business. So these are what you would see in the typical waterfall process. If you're last in line, essentially you'd have nothing to do but just follow these people, like follow whatever they say, their opinions. Essentially, you're a pixel pusher. But we can go through the same process and expect a different outcome. So all of this has to change. So you have to control the flow and frequency of decisions. So get it from this point, like very crazy, like when you're designing revisions, features, it's more a question, not really an answer, to prioritizing certain steps of the process, and then always looking back. So it's not just like setting deadlines in each part of the process, like having fixed points where you diverge, you try to include people, and then you converge, you try to define the solution or define the problem or prioritize, or also look back. If you feel like we might have missed a step, just go back or try to look at people's feedback. So essentially, you have to do it a bit more calm, and it can't be as crazy as this. So how you do that is you ask yourself these questions. It's not that can you build a product. It's also not that how can you build a product, but you should be asking yourself, should you build it at all? So at each part of that step, like should we continue, or like what gives us an idea that this is a great solution? So a lot of things have been built without asking those questions, and we don't want to be that, right? We don't want to be uh, even the biggest companies have tried, and maybe they've tested, and they allow this all of these mistakes allowed them to create solutions that are better moving forward. But then us, we don't have that the luxury of time and money to go through like a final solution that actually doesn't really work for the users. Like we have to be more nimble. We have to always look back. We have to um, get rid of our faulty assumptions of what users think, want, or how they behave. Like when you say, I think the user says this, that's already a red flag. You should try to verify it if it's actually said. So look at data or look at the past user interview and if they actually said it. So again, the old process is flawed. If you delay user feedback until the product is fully built, um, it will all go wrong. So the waterfall has to change. So how should it change or how could it change? You work in bite-sized steps. You always look back and you do it for the user. Again, the UX process, it's like this is based on the design thinking process. I won't go through it fully, but a great book on the design thinking process is Changed by Design by Tim Brown, Design Sprint by Jake Knapp. So it's a condensed version of the big design thinking process or the recipe itself. This combines a recipe, ingredients, and actually cooks for you. So this is the Design Sprint book by Jake Knapp. So I wrote the wrong thing. Actually, that's a secondary author, but it's Jake Knapp and John Saratsky and Braden Kowitz, I think. There. Start with empathy. Then you go to definition, ideation, prototyping, and testing super quickly. You do user research, as mentioned. You talk to people. Best way to do that: 30-minute in-depth interview of what their current situation is. A great way to do user interviews, as well as try looking at the YC, how to talk to users, Y Combinator, how to talk to users. I think that's in their YouTube and also in their startup school. So if you search that, you'll see a great video on like the questions to ask, how you could be how you could be neutral when asking questions. You can a good rule of thumb is interviewing 5 users. If you could interview more, definitely that could be great. But really, like this has been a controversial topic. How many should you really be interviewing? But like it gets you 80% of the way there. If you just talk to 5 users and like even talking to one user, and it gets you moving forward. So any more than that, any more than one is great. So try to get the sense of if everyone's saying the general same problems or um, having the same experiences, even though they're across different demographics or they're different ages, different backgrounds, you should probably stop your interviews there. So if you're in your fourth and then you've had 4 people saying the same thing, that might be a good rule to get back to work. So you have enough information already. So other things you could do is a daily diary, a day in the life, but not focus group discussions because even though it's helpful in a certain to a certain extent, focus group discussions would sway the room. So essentially, whoever's the loudest person in the room would sway the opinions of everyone else. If you have more than one person that you're interviewing, if they're five, they're 10, like one person will say an opinion and then they will sway the rest of the group, and everyone will either nod, yeah, 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 that's my problem too, and that it might not have been true. So stay away from focus group discussions and stick to one-on-one user interviews. You'll probably get better results. So there's a ton of user research methods. It boils down to attitudinal, behavioral, qualitative, and quantitative. Attitudes and behaviors. Behaviors are what they do. Attitudes are what they say. Qualitative versus quantitative. Qualitative is like more opinion based or uh, yeah, like a conversation versus quantitative. It's actual things that you can measure. So there's numbers in there. So broad spectrum, but yeah, like you can just get started by interviewing users. The best UX research book for me is Just Enough Research by Erica Hall, and also Rocket Surgery Made Easy by Steve Krug. So there's a video. If you Google Rocket Surgery Made Easy on by Steve Krug on YouTube, you can see how he talks to users. It's actually a great 20-minute watch. How to test essentially an application, and he has steps there. I also have steps here, and also you can see it in the recording, the 5-hour recording if you want. But the 20-minute video on YouTube might be easier. I wouldn't go through these. These are empathy maps. So all of these are great to represent users. But we have 12 minutes left. So um, like quickly, customer journey mapping, I mentioned earlier, we did an exercise just like that, customer journey mapping exercise, trying to understand what our users feel, what they do, what they interact with. In my previous job, and we essentially mapped everything out, whether it's an email we send out, it's an ad, and then what happens in the background, what actions do we take, is it connected to an application? So it's like kind of no code mapping and everything. Thanks for sharing the link, Max. Um, Again, there's a ton of tools that you can do this digitally, whether it's like Miro.com, Figma, or actual post-its or whiteboards in person. You can do that as well. Defining goals is always important. This is a great way to form a hypothesis. As a user, I want to do an action so I can get to an outcome. So that's your hypothesis. That's what you're trying to prove or disprove with your next steps. So you've gathered a lot of research. Now you're trying to measure, set goals, and create objectives. And then this is essentially the artifact that you can think about or refer back to. Is your next set of solutions always answering this thing that you just defined, which you were able to define because of your research, because of your interviews? So sketching, low fidelity, lots of this. So these are great to go through, but you can watch the video. It's 5 hours. You can skip. You can skip a lot if I mumble or like So these are 300 slides. I think I got you through 150 before I stopped. Uh, so a lot of these are great, but I'm trying to skip to UX mistakes before we go to Q&A. Most common UX mistakes that you might be doing now or you might be encountering in the future. So in forms, don't do the one on the left, do the one on the right. But as you would see as I scroll through this, so why not do the one on the left? Uh, because it's not group. It's hard to go through a list of seemingly unending list of fields. So you want to group information. But now the one on the left, sorry, the one on the right is now on the left because you could do that a little bit better. So you can place the labels on the top because it's best for completion rates. It's easier for users to process. It's best for multi-language as well. If you're going to change the word and then suddenly the character count jumps, like you might want to place the label on top rather than on the left because it would essentially change your layout. But also there's one more. So the one on the right is now on the left and then here. So try to minimize the number of fields as much as possible. So if you don't really need the first name and last name, right? Like if you're not going to greet them their full names on their emails, for example, you can just ask the full name rather than asking two things. It's one less field to go through. And then say for date of birth, rather than asking for each field, maybe like a calendar picker, calendar date picker. And then time of arrival, like a date picker. So those are quick tips. And then bad information architecture, bad error messages that don't say what really happens. Uh-oh, something went wrong. It might be your fault. Or is it my fault? Like what? I might have done something wrong. You always hear that from users. You never want to put the blame on them. That's the most frustrating thing. Bad default values, confusing icons that you don't know really like what they mean. So don't use weird icons. Use standard icons that you always see. So hamburger menu, the three dots, whichever, like share button. So across the different platforms, there's so many icons that's just represent share. Overuse of modals. So Airtable's about like is at fault at this. Like they overuse modals pop-ups. Really like I can't go through it now, but you can't really put this things that might get destroyed in a pop-up. So say for example, you don't know if you click X if it actually saved. So if you follow this pattern on your own website, you have to know that Airtable actually saves each input, right? But what if you just copied like this interaction? It might not work out well. Meaningless information, destructive and confirmation actions right beside each other. So finish and cancel. So who remembers installation wizards like these in Windows? So there. So that's mostly it. For the rest, it's in the 5 hour crash course. But I'd love to go through your questions now. We have 7 minutes, but I can extend if you want.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christian. That was epic. Learnt a lot there. So I'll just open it up for questions. Yeah, feel free to come off mute and ask away, people.
Hey, Christians. So this is a safe space. What are some of the dumbest questions that clients have asked you? I mean, Usher is already up there, but like,
Right. Dumbest questions like
not dumbest, maybe weirdest.
Weirdest requests.
Yeah.
I was asked once to block a whole country from accessing a website because there were a lot of hackers. I had to block a list of IP for a whole website, so that was pretty weird. What else? Like, what are weird requests? Yeah, like just weird. Like, I was asked by a board member. Like, I was working in carparts.com maybe 13 12 years ago or something like that. So carparts.com, like they're Like you go there to buy car parts for your car if you want to fix it yourself. And yeah, like a board member asked me if I could do things for her daughter's design work. So yeah, so that's pretty weird. Like doing beyond like your job. That's always pretty weird. But yeah, like misconceptions about UX, those are the general ones you might come across. Like regardless of the country, UX like the understanding of UX as a practice, you'll always get people that, oh, you're a UX UI designer. Can you design my logo? Or can you you do websites, right? Can you do something else that are not websites? Or you do websites, right? Just design the website. I don't need the strategy part. Don't talk to our users. Don't do the research. It's more of really you're not just solving their problem, but also you're teaching them there might be a better way to solve the problem for them.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, Christian. That was a great presentation. Lovely slides.
Thank
Obviously, the content as well, not just the slides. But I was wondering, because obviously I'm involved in a lot of sort of startups and creating businesses, and we've found that we really can't trust what customers say. So, you know, a lot of the presentation emphasized user feedback and the interviews and whatnot. And I'd really not be inclined to do that. I'd be inclined to sort of make something using my common sense and then test it and see their behavior. And if there's a conversion issue, then sort of take it to the team and say, are we doing something wrong? Or rather than asking our customer, because often I find they don't even know that there is something else on offer.
Right.
I'm just wondering, is that adding a step?
Yeah. Like I totally agree, 100%. So users tell one thing, so users say one thing and they do another. That typically happens, right?
Yeah.
Follow what they do, or so there's two different things there. So there's a user research interview process and then a usability testing process. So they might say in a usability testing or UX testing where they have your applications on their hand and they're reacting to it. Their reactions, their raw reactions, are more valuable than research, like raw one-on-one interviews, because that's out of context, and they might just be trying to remember something that might not be accurate as well, or the questions also. So not trying to blame just the users, but the questions that happens during those interviews, if it's not the right questions to ask, that might also sway decisions one way or another, right? So it has to, like, the best way is usability testing, like create something and then test it out. Whether it's A/B testing, actual things that like people click, or just unmoderated or moderated usability testing. So unmoderated, you can use tools like uxtesting.com. You can give them a set of instructions, they do it, or there's like applications like that measure the time between the previous page and then clicking on the next page. So you'd have certain feedback like that. Moderated usability testing is you're talking to them and then you're asking them questions like, what do you think this website is for? And actually, I don't know, but this is interesting. Like, oh, I think this is a website for a phone plan or something. So like finally they figure it out. So like if they have that long pause, or like if they're confused, those are indicators already of what you could be solving, because say the header image didn't really communicate it right away, or the big piece of text didn't really communicate what you wanted to communicate right away. So from those raw feedback from a moderated usability testing session, you can get to a solution quicker than just one-on-one interviews. One-on-one interviews, user research is great. If you're doing a new solution in a new for a new set of users, or even like the same set of users but a totally new solution, and there's nothing there in the market, or you haven't done it before, so it's really very much exploratory. You're trying to understand the space. Like
Mm.
what happens? Like what are their solutions right now?
Mm. No, that makes sense. Thank you.
No problem.
Anyone else for some questions? I've got one. Just looks like there isn't. Edmund, I saw you nudging forward. Is there no questions from you?
Brother, I always ask questions. Christian, I would just like to hear. Actually, you know what, Max? I want to hear your question.
Sure. No, of course. I was kind of just curious, like when to know when to stop in terms of you mentioned about asking that question, should I be building this thing? When is it, at what point, I guess it's different for each use case, but at what point do you say, yeah, let's do something else, or let's just scrap this and work on something else, or attack the problem in a different way? When do you see that red flag?
Right. So if you get to like a prototype and test right away, and then the test goes well or it goes bad. If it goes bad, you revise it, you revise your design a little bit and you test it again. So you'll get to a point where you've been doing it 4 times and 5 times and hasn't improved. So it might be a problem bigger than the solution or the output that you're testing. It might be a problem that might not be the right user, or it might not be the right it might not be a solution for them. So like there's things that you have to make a decision at that point that okay, like things aren't working. I have to zoom out a little bit more from these steps. Like I might be able to do it in a simpler manner. Like this might not be the channel for them or the medium. It might be simpler if I just launch say a Facebook group to solve this problem and conversations happen there than doing a no-code app where they'd have to download or install or like sign up or things like that. So like try to look at okay, like what could I be doing that actually solves the problem or gets to the outcome right away. Then you always have that in the back of your mind as you're iterating and doing the iteration loops with users.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's super useful, and appreciate John as well for chipping in there. Thank you. Cool. I think probably got time for one more, potentially 2 questions. Yeah, so feel free to fire away, guys.
Hi, Christian. Thank you very much. It's excellent presentation and quite a lot to take on board. I was just wondering, obviously, well, it's not obvious, but to me, psychology plays a huge part in what you do. And is there any sort of just easy, low-hanging sort of psychological wins that you might impart that we, you know, someone building a humble sort of landing page might be able to take on board?
Yeah,
sure.
sure.
Something that's obvious to you. Thank you.
So I'll throw you guys 2 links that are great for psychology and rules and all of those nice things. So this site I'm throwing on the link right now on the chat right now. Sorry. Growth design case studies. So they're actually going through that user journey, and then they're calling out why something might not work at this step versus at this step. So they're calling out, say, the header text is too small. It says here in this study that blah 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 blah, or like so just you can go through. It's like an interactive presentation, so that's great. A great resource, growth design / case studies, case dash studies. That one. And then a general behavioral psychology rule book is lawsofux.com. So laws of UX, so it tells you certain laws. It's of course like it's you don't really call back to these laws when you're designing a landing page, for example. Or oh, I'm not designing things according to the Fitts law or something. You don't really think about that, but it's good to know that there are laws that govern why something works and why it doesn't. Doesn't mean it's a universal law. It just means that it's common. So common according to our age, our time, our medium. So that's the thing with behavioral psychology principles or psychology in general. It doesn't say that this context should work for all people across the board, but it should cover most use cases. So say for example, there's cognitive bias, or say do-do-do. What's a good principle here that I can call out? So Miller's law, for example. So an average person can only keep 7 plus or minus 2. So either 5 to 9, but generally 7 items in their working memory. So if you have piece of say a sequence of blog posts, before you hit new load more, yeah, just end it at 7 or maybe even 9 or something like that. Because if you do more than that, like it feels like overwhelming. Or say, for example, you can group things. So there's the grouping law. I don't know where it is, but yeah, it's somewhere here. And also, the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto principle, is somewhere here as well. Like 20% of the work does 80% of the outcome, or provides for the 80% of the effects, comes from 20% of the causes. So that's the MVP thinking, like when you're doing no-code products, right? So 80-20 principle. So lots of things to learn over here. Try applying these laws to your site, right? Like if there's like serial position effect, um, users have the propensity to remember the first and last items in the series, not really the things in between. So things like that. I'm not sure how it essentially applies, but yeah, these are UX laws.
That's
The
absolutely
case studies are
perfect.
free. Yeah,
Perfect.
no problem.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's I think that's a really great note to end on. I'll definitely be taking a look at these and sort of cross referencing when I'm I feel like I will be asking the question to myself, am I following the Pareto rule or something stupid now when I'm going through my landing page? But I guess you better be on the right side of these laws. So thank you for sharing those. Cool. I know we're at 7 past now, so we've gone a little bit over, but thank you for so much for sparing your time, your wisdom, and your knowledge on this topic that is not so much talked about in no code. So I'm really glad that we've touched sort of the basics today, and hopefully this is like the platform for you guys to go and deep dive into this stuff, because it's so important for the products that we're building. Before we wrap up, is there any final words, Christian, that you'd like to share with the group, or any resources that you'd like to direct people to?
Yeah, for sure. Not much. Like you can follow me on Twitter if you want to. Like the only thing I talk about is UX, whether it's like building like our UX products, or like talking about design in general. But yeah, like just if you haven't talked to a user, or if you're still building and you're pushing that back to the last step, try reconsidering that. Try to talk to users now. If you're already talking to users, like make it a habit, like talk to at least one user weekly, and then try to grow it to 2 and then 3. And that's how you get started with like UX, like just those feedback, and then using the right principle. So make sure you guys check out the YC video, the Y Combinator video on how to talk to users. Those essentially set the principles. They say it in a better manner of how I said it, which is basically be neutral, don't lead the witness, right? Yeah, so things like that.
Awesome. Okay, well, that's a wrap. Thanks everyone for coming. I'll see you all on Slack, Twitter, or on calls over the next week. And have a good one, guys. And thanks again, Christian. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Have a good day.